Hi there, BookTube. It's Roz, and it's a week into July, and definitely time for a wrap-up of the things I read in June. All the delights, discoveries, any disappointments? No disappointments this month. So, I was onto a winner, wasn't I? And I finished, well, either 13 or 14 or 15 books, depending on how you count it. Doesn't really matter. It all will become clear. In the course of this month, I read things from 8th century BCE through to new releases in 2025. I read things from set in rural Sussex, or present day Australia, historical Middle Europe, recent times in Japan, and a sort of dystopian future world of sorts. So, got about a bit. In what's becoming a bit of a habit, I will end this video with what I'd call my book of the month, I think. But I'm going to start with what is essentially my book of the year so far. And that's because it's a book that I've been reading since the 1st of January 2025. That took you a long time, you say, looking at me askance. Well, you will understand when I say that it's this, the Odyssey. And on the 1st of January this year, I started this, the Robert Fagles translation of the Odyssey, and I also started listening to the Emily Wilson translation. This one was about 1997, and hers about 2017, I think. But both wonderful modern translations of this epic poem, written or written down, perhaps we should say, in around the 8th century. We're not exactly sure when, nor do we know for sure that it was by someone called Homer. I mean, probably not, in fact. But it doesn't matter, because this is an epic poem, but it is also an amazingly vigorous human story with adventure and fantastical elements, and moments of sadness, and moments of humour, and moments of wonder, and moments of ridiculousness. Just a glorious story. The Iliad I read last year in a similar fashion with 2 translations, and that is all kind of like war and heroes and honour and death and infighting and male pride, and the Odyssey is in many ways a more emotionally complex book, because it's about a journey, it's about a marriage, it's about coming home, family, an interesting and complex book. And the reason, I suppose, I mean, you don't need me to persuade you to read something that's been read and enjoyed or listened to and enjoyed for more than 2,500 years. But what I would say is don't be intimidated by the Iliad or the Odyssey. If you spread them out over time, they're very digestible, and there is lots to enjoy. So I had another sort of long, slow read of sorts. Well, a couple actually going on that I finished in June. Well, I say I finished this in June, but this is where, the counting of how many books I finished gets a bit odd, okay? Because this is Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce. It is the most ludicrous and extraordinary novel you could wish to read, or not wish to read. Joyce spent years writing it. It came out in 1939. It's notoriously indigestible. It's also very long. I finished in June the version of it that I had embarked on reading, which is a sort of a selection of chapters from it in a group, kind of led by Roy Reads Anything, but a great group of interesting readers. And so, in effect, what we read was an abridged version of Finnegan's Wake. Will I go back and read the rest of it? No, I don't think so. Did I enjoy having more than a taste, a significant sort of dip into this weird book? Yes, I did. But I will say no more, because I think it's one of those books where if you know you might want to read it, you will find out more about it than I'm possibly going to say now. That's probably not true of the book that I'm going to go on to next, which is Praiseworthy by Alexis Wright. Now, that had something in common with Finnegan's Wake, I guess, in being long and complex and challenging to read, and yes, not at all straightforward, but much helped by being read in a group. And the group I was reading with was read by Lindy's Magpie Reads. I've had a few different people who've got involved in a group read of Praiseworthy, and that makes sense, because you kind of, I felt I needed something to carry me along through this book. Now, it's by Alexis Wright. I've heard her referred to as Australia's greatest living writer, and I think that may well be fair. As a book, Praiseworthy, I'd say it's an important book in that what Wright does, and she's done this in her other works as well, I believe, but Praiseworthy is the one I've read, is she expresses, I suppose, anger and outrage about or on behalf of Aboriginal people in Australia, of which she is one. And she does that in the most sort of poetic and kind of prose. And as I say, an unusual, non-linear, repetitive, complex, often symbolic story. It's sometimes funny, it's sometimes tragic. It has some really intense moments and some unique characters. It's also at times really challenging and quite confusing to read. It's a book I would hesitate to recommend to others, but it's a book that you get, when you get to the end of it, you think, I'm really happy that I read that. I have grown by reading that book. There you go. I read another long, complex book that I spread between May and June this year, but this one was significantly more digestible, and that was My Friends by Hisham Matar, 2020. It was published 2024. He's a Libyan-British author. It's the second book of his that I've read. They've both been superb, actually. It's beautifully written. It's complex. It's a very touching book, I suppose. It tells the tale of a small group, but through the eyes of one of them, of Libyan exiles living mostly in London between the early 1980s and the Arab Spring, so like 2013, so 30 years. It's a book about friendship, but also quite a political book, because it's about the experience of exile. Our main character, Khaled, he comes to the UK as a government-sponsored student, sent to Edinburgh to study. He comes down to London for and takes part in a demonstration, anti-Gaddafi demonstration, outside the Libyan embassy. And if you know anything about 1980s history, you may know that what happened was people within the Libyan embassy shot on the crowd. They killed an English police officer. There was then a siege of the Libyan embassy. Those are factual events. Our character, Khaled, because he's caught up in that, realises that he can never go back to Libya whilst Gaddafi is still in power, and he becomes a refugee in exile. And the story kind of evolves from there. I would highly recommend it as a book to read. That's both stimulating, but also just a very readable, very lovely book. Now, all these ones I've mentioned so far would kind of qualify for big book summer choices. The readathon that's sort of encouraging us to read fat things in the summer. And so with the next one that I read, and that was Desperate Remedies by Thomas Hardy. And this provided, in contrast with all the others, I suppose a bit of light relief. Now, you might not think that, in a book that's, 400 or more pages of 19th century fiction, but never assume, I'm sure you wouldn't if you're watching this channel, never assume that 19th century novels are, slow, heavy, worthy or turgid. This is a sensation novel. It is an unbelievable page turner. It was Hardy's first novel, or first one to be published. I read it because I was kind of pushed to read it because Jen the librarian is doing a read-along of all Hardy's novels in publication order, and I'm dipping in for all the ones that I haven't yet read, and I never read this one. And I had an idea that it wasn't very good. How wrong I was. It's just that it's different from most of Hardy's in that it's a sensation novel. It's got murder and passion and blackmail, and it's also very funny. It has Hardy's sort of trademark wonderful descriptions. Some of the themes that you know in his later works are already there, but in a package that's just loads of fun to read. This certainly qualified as a joy read for me in Joy Reading June, another of the month's sort of reading events. Another joy book for me in the month was this one, and as I say, having read Finnegan's Wake and Praiseworthy and so on, I needed some light relief thrown into my month, so I was grateful for this. And this is Kiki's Delivery Service. It's a children's book, middle grade I think you'd call it. It's by Eiko Kadono. It's a sort of modern classic of Japanese children's literature. Made into a Studio Ghibli film. This translation into English was about 2020, something like that. Yes, 2020, by Emily Balistieri. Delightful translation of a delightful book, lots of fun, made me very happy reading it because it's about a teenage witch and her talking cat. Of course, it was a joy. It's a book I'd happily press into the hand of a child or someone just turning into their teens, because it's about finding yourself, but in a very entertaining fashion. It was the YN middle grade choice for Reading the Globe in June. And you will know if you watch this channel regularly, but I'll mention it all the same, just in case. I'm involved in a year-long Reading the Globe reading project, challenge, whatever you'd like to call it, hosted by Katya, and I'm co-host with her of the contemporary strand of that, but there's also classics and YA middle grade. And so the contemporary choice for Reading the Globe this month was The Third Love by Hiromi Kawakami. She wrote, well, that came out in Japan in 2020. The translation by Ted Goosen came out early in 2024. I made a live show with Katya about this, which I will link to below. It was on Katya's channel, so I'll link to it below. It's a very intriguing book, The Third Love. It's the protagonist is kind of in present day Japan, but it's almost historical fiction in that most of the book is about her dreams, in which she goes back to earlier periods in Japanese history, and how sort of through experiencing in those dreams the lives of Japanese women long ago, she kind of gets a different perspective on the present day and present day relationships, and on herself. So it's kind of a book of self-discovery through understanding history. It has a sort of kind of slightly fantastic quality without being a fantasy book. I say, watch the live show if you're intrigued by that. I then read another book by the same author, and that's Under the Eye of the Big Bird, which she actually wrote earlier. It was in 2016, but the translation came out kind of later in 2024. So it's the most recent book by her to be available in English. And the translation of this one was by Asa Yoneda. Tilly read it too. It was our June choice for contemporary fiction that we both read, and then we make a video about together. So I don't want to preempt that video because I have a feeling that Tilly and I had quite different views or experiences of this book, and I think that this was one that she enjoyed more than I did, unlike Whaleful that we talked about last month, read last month and talked about last month, which kind of was the other way around. So I'm not going to spoil that by saying any more about it now. But if you've read it, I would love to hear your comments below. So moving on. Okay, another book that I read kind of in a shared way this month was this one, During the Reign of the Queen of Persia, and that's because this was the choice for Sean Bruce Books has a kind of Patreon book group, and at intervals we read a book and discuss it together, and they're often backlist books, being Sean's sort of thing, and that's always a pleasure to me. I enjoy reading things that I might have missed because they just never came to my attention. And this was one, because this was published in 1983 it's by Joan Chase. She's an American author. It's set in a small community in rural which state? Ohio, which is it? Ohio, that's it. And I'd never heard of it and wouldn't have read it without, say, Sean's group. And it's an unusual book. First reason it's unusual is because it's written in the first person plural, it's we all the way through, and the we in this book are a group of 4 cousins, 2 sets of sisters. They're the grandchildren of the Queen of Persia. That's the sort of nickname of their grandmother. They spend a lot of time living or staying on her farm in Ohio. And we're never quite sure which of the 4 is talking when they say we at any one time. It's a kind of interesting device, put it that way. And notwithstanding this rather sort of sweet airbrushed 1980s cover, because this is an edition from 1983, it's a very dark book, I found. Yes, they're sort of girls and teenagers through most of the book, but this is a book about anger and domestic violence and sex and treating people. And I mean, it's got some great, really feisty characters. It's a really interesting book. I'm not sure I would kind of wholeheartedly kind of push it into another reader's hands. But I'm very glad to have read it. Absolutely not a disappointment, far from it. Really interesting and well written novel. It was a debut at the time. There you go. Now, I would say that the dominant feature of my reading this June was historical fiction, and that was in part linked to the fact that it was the historical fiction readathon this month. Thank you, Charlotte of Coiny Reads, for making me notice that. But I always enjoy reading historical fiction, and I hit some absolute stunners this month. So I've mentioned that The Third Love was historical fiction of a sort, because actually most of the book, although it's set in present-day Japan, most of the book actually takes place in her dreams in historical Japan. Another one that sort of is weirdly somewhere between, well, in this case, speculative fiction, historical fiction, is this one, The Book of Records by Madeleine Thien. Now, this is newly out. It was published sort of late May of this year. And I loved Thien's book, Do Not Say We Have Nothing, and was very keen to read this. Steve also read it. We've made a video together about the book, which will it'll either appear just before this video or just after it. So again, I'm not going to say loads about this, but what I will say, why do I say it's sort of historical fiction? Because it's set in this sort of near future world after some sort of environmental and political kind of disaster and collapse. But actually, the majority of the book is three stories from the past. The story of the life of Hannah Arendt in sort of mid-20th century Germany and France, and then ultimately she moves to America. The story of Baruch Spinoza in 17th century, what was then the Dutch Republic, now the Netherlands. And then further back in time to China in the 8th century, and the life of the poet Du Fu, who I really knew nothing about before I read this book. So, yeah, really, really interesting. And as I say, has its own video. So I will say no more about that one, other than do read it. Do read it if you like an intellectual sort of book. So we're down to last four, I think. And these are all kind of more like kind of straight historical fiction, what you describe as historical fiction. And I'm going to start with this one. Now, I love this so much. I made a standalone review of it, but I'm going to I want to kind of really actively encourage you to get hold of this book and read it, because after I did my review, the author Angharad, Hampshire, who and this was published in 2024, she got in touch to say thank you for the review, because she explained that this is published by an indie publisher. It's one that I actually hadn't even heard of before I read this book. It's called Northodox Press. It's from Malden in North Yorkshire, and it's such a small press that she's having to do the majority of the sort of promotion and marketing of the book herself. Now, happily, it was shortlisted for the Walter Scott Prize for Historical Fiction, which is how I came to sort of hear of it, and will have given it a huge boost. But still, nevertheless, it's not getting the attention that I think it deserves. It is a really powerful and rather special novel that is extremely gripping, grim at times, really thought-provoking. it's about an ordinary Austrian woman, real life person, but this is fictionalized account of her life, who then becomes a concentration camp guard under the Nazis, and then after the war ultimately kind of reverts to being a really ordinary woman who, gets married and is well liked, and and it's a book that asks you to think about what you might do, what anyone might do in a certain set of circumstances, including looking at her American husband and how he chooses to stand by her. And would you, when she comes, when her past crimes, as it were, catch up with her, and she is tried in a sort of for war crimes, or crimes against humanity, I suppose. So, do read it, and don't let the fact that it was published by an indie press mean that it fails to get the readers that it deserves. So, where are we now? That was the Mare. Now, the other thing I should say is that I got my real life book group to read this book, and we had one of our best discussions ever. So, that illustrates the kind of book it is, I suppose. It's also really well written, beautiful prose, straightforward, but great. Another book that I really enjoyed, and I made a standalone review of it because I did, was Call Me Ishmaelle by Xiaolu. Also came out in 2025, so another really recent release. It's a lot of fun as a book. The shorthand description of it is that it's a feminist retelling of Moby Dick, where the main character Ishmaelle becomes female Ishmaelle, who then pretends to be a male called Ishmaelle in order to get onto a whaling ship. Long story. I won't go into it because I made a video of it. What I would say is it's not a kind of a book with emotional and philosophical heft like this one, or indeed this one, but it is a good read, and particularly if you know or have read Moby Dick, but for anyone who enjoys a 19th century romp, there you go, with a bit of cross-dressing thrown in. Now, I haven't mentioned that this June saw the 10th anniversary of Katie's channel Books and Things, and she did a little readathon just for a week celebrating that, and asked us to think about reading a classic or a work of historical fiction, or both. Well, I did read a classic, Desperate Remedies, and I did read a work of historical fiction particularly to celebrate Katie, and that was The Wonder by Emma Donoghue. Why The Wonder by Emma Donoghue? Not because she's a wonder, but because it's one of her favourite books of historical fiction, and it's one that, it came out in 2016, and it's one that I missed at the time, and I've been listening to people sort of telling me how much I'd love it ever since, so it was a good excuse to pick it up and read it. Did I love it? Yes, it's Emma Donoghue is one of those writers who's a bit hit and miss for me. I really enjoyed some of her books. Frog Music, that was good fun. Her breakout novel, The Room, that was really tense. Lots of good ones. And others I found a little bit sort of pedestrian or lackluster, or maybe sort of slightly predictable. I don't know. So she's mixed for me. The Wonder was a winner. It's set in mid-19th century Ireland. An English nurse trained by Florence Nightingale. It takes a job. She expects to be nursing, but in fact she's more kind of observing an 11-year-old girl who is supposedly miraculously living without having eaten for 4 months, and she gets sucked into a complicated situation of prejudice and rivalry and uncertainty, and prejudice, including her own prejudices, absolutely, and kind of moral ambiguity, I suppose. Yeah, a goodie. Not like my best ever, but a good book. So, and that brings me to an unreserved recommendation of a book, and as I say, my book of the month, and that was Days of Light by Megan Hunter, which is another 2025 release, so newly out. I obviously did a standalone review of it, and in that I describe it as a book that it's almost perfectly designed to make me happy as a reader. And if you watch that video, you'll get a feeling for whether it would also be perfect for you as a reader. Why was it perfect for me? I loved the inspiration for the book, which is comes out of the Bloomsbury group, and some one of the families within that, Vanessa Bell and Clive Bell and Duncan Grant and their daughter Angelica Garnett. But it's not a retelling of their lives. That was the sort of the kind of kicking off point for the story. I love the structure of the book. It follows the main character Ivy's whole life, from cusp of adulthood through to extreme old age, but through the medium of giving us single days, 6, maybe 7 individual days of her life that are at sort of key moments in her life. I love the setting because it's mostly set in Sussex, in a part of Sussex that I know well. It's the county where I live. But above all, I love the quality of the writing, of the language. Beautiful, beautiful prose. And it's one of those books that hit me on both fronts in terms of the mind and the heart. So I can't recommend it too highly. I'd say that that and the Mare are probably my 2 sort of top recommendations of the month. And this one, if you're the right person for it, which you'll have to watch Steve and I talking about it to find out why. If you've read any of these, do tell me what you thought of them. If you read other things that you think, Ros, you should read, having heard what I thought of these ones, do talk about that too. And just, what did you enjoy in your June?